Hello, everybody. Welcome to our final episode of the year. This is Daily Coast's The Brief, our weekly show about politics with me, Marcos Molitzis, and Carrie Eleveld. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Festivus, whatever it is you are celebrating, even if it is nothing but some well-deserved downtime. Welcome. And thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to have a all Daily Coast retrospective. We're going to be looking back and looking forward 2020 and 2021. And where we sit in this sort of like pivotal moment in history where, Carrie, we just survived the worst president in the history of the United States. I don't think it's even debatable. And yet we have all these huge challenges ahead of us. What's this moment saying to you right now?
Whoa. That's what it's saying to me. It's saying to me, whoa. Like, so, we may talk about this later, but one of my biggest takeaways on the year is we saved the democracy. We survived a slid toward fascism, right? In doing so, we elected the first female person of color to be vice president of this country. And it's absolutely historic and meaningful. And yet it feels like we're going to spend the next decade or two, potentially one election away from something disastrous. So, it's both hopeful in terms of engagement and how many people, this really drew into the process, the record number of voters, but also precarious at this point. I guess that's where I would hopeful, but precarious. Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize just how precarious this victory is. It feels big, right? We won by, what's the latest number? 7 million votes. And
74 electoral votes.
Yeah. So you think, that's big. But here's the thing. You flipped 70,000 votes in Nevada, Wisconsin, Arizona, in Georgia, and Donald Trump wins. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the inverse. And this is kind of what shows how messed up the Electoral College is, that the same thing happened in 2016 where Donald Trump, we could have flipped 60,000 votes in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and Hillary Clinton would have been president. She won by 3 million votes. Here we are where Joe Biden wins by 7 million votes, the same exact Electoral College count, and yet it's an even smaller number of votes could have flipped the election in the other way, right? So this is a very precarious victory. No matter how much more dominant we are as a movement nationally, the fact that the Senate is so undemocratic, that the Electoral College is so undemocratic, right, and the House will be gerrymandered again because we lost key races in state legislative races all across the country. Republicans are going to get to redraw their districts again. So this is actually kind of scary place to be.
Right. I mean, it is a call to more engagement. It's a call to more participation. I've heard John Meacham say this a couple times on MSNBC, and I'm an avid cable news watcher because I watch for what the reporters are saying at the White House and what the reporters are saying on Capitol Hill that I can't be there, to get. And so I filter that information, but at the same time, you get a panoply of other more input. And John Meacham was talking about it being an entrepreneurial moment of like civic engagement. I'm not sure if that's exactly the way he put it, but that's sort of the spirit of what he was saying. And I feel like that. I feel like it is this entrepreneurial moment of how do we as individuals, as citizens of this country, do our personal best to bring us back towards representative democracy. And, that's a different answer for everyone. And some people aren't interested in it. As we know, there's a whole bunch of, Republicans. The Republican Party basically endorsed fascism. I mean, if it didn't endorse it before the election, it certainly endorsed it after.
Not even out in the open, not even hiding it anymore.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have 3 guests today. So we have an action-packed episode. So we're going to get right to it. Our first guest is Mark Sumner. He's a senior political writer at Daily Coast. He is our resident scientist. He's our resident knows everything. If you need like a sort of an interesting fact that apropos of nothing, Mark's going to have that for you. And I think I've learned more from Mark at Daily Kos than maybe anybody else. I mean, he's just a wealth of information and knowledge. And so it is such a pleasure to have him on. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So Mark was writing about the pandemic before most people were writing about they didn't even know the pandemic was happening. I mean, he was our early alert system. He was writing it. I think it was back in January when you first started writing about this,
right?
When it was still just a very localized outbreak in Wuhan, China. And so
I literally remember Mark dropping into Slack at some point on like a Saturday. I was trying to finish my column, and he said, I just looked at the numbers out of Wuhan and we should be terrified. And I was like, or something like that. And I was like, I don't have time to be terrified right now. But like, it was that early. It was way before anybody was on top of this thing. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So Mark, now that the whole year has played out, could you even have remotely imagined that where we are today was a thing that could have been possible when you first started looking at this virus out of Wuhan?
No, absolutely not. When this started, it became obvious pretty early on that it wasn't going to be contained to Wuhan, right? That there was going to be a pandemic of some extent. This thing was just too easily communicable to be contained. But like everybody else, I made the foolish assumption that people would make reasonable choices, and that there wouldn't be a pandemic the way we're seeing it now. Even when it hit like South Korea, and you started seeing those numbers where in South Korea they went up to 8,000 cases just almost overnight. But you saw how they responded, right? They put in a national testing program, they put in case tracing, and really, to my surprise, they brought the case count down just about as quickly as it had come up. And I expected that model to be repeated in other countries. I expected we'd see one South Korea and another South Korea and another South Korea in terms of how those outbreaks went. So when it hit the United States and we deliberately did nothing, that was really shocking. It still is shocking.
Yeah, I mean, remember there used to be the saying, and I'll say used to be, we used to say like, oh, that person, you're avoiding it like the plague. And now we know nobody, at least Americans, at least half of them don't care to avoid a plague. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And a lot of that obviously comes from the top. I mean, can you imagine a universe where Donald Trump would have been wearing masks from the beginning and telling people to stay home and actually pushing for free money to people so they wouldn't have to go to work and put themselves and everybody else at risk? Could have been a lot different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, the key date goes back to March 13th. That was the day, you remember, when Trump had the CEOs of 6 big box stores out there to tell you about how the testing was going to happen. Up until that point, you'd already had Trump kind of downplaying everything and 15 going to go down to 0, etc. But that day, it seemed like he was taking it seriously. Here's all of these big CEOs, and they're out there telling you how there are going to be thousands of test locations. We're going to do contact tracing. And, it seemed like, okay, finally, we're going to get this in gear. It's too late. It's already, the outbreak in the Northeast has already started. But at least now we're taking it a little seriously. But then he made, like I said, the deliberate decision to not go forward with that. It wasn't, I've got right across from me a sign that's got a Robert Heinlein quote that says, "You have attributed conditions to villainy that simply result from stupidity." But sometimes,
that's such a coincidence, Mark, because I have that same sign across from me. I just exact fit. It's unbelievable, uncanny. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
But sometimes, it's easy to attribute to stupidity what's genuine villainy. And in this case, Trump wasn't, ignorant of what he was doing. He made that choice to allow the disease to spread deliberately because he thought it would be politically good for him, as amazing as that sounds.
Yeah, and if you remember that was, I'm pretty sure you're talking about that Rose Garden event on March 13th where he rolled out those big box CEOs.
Right.
And one of the things they also did at that press conference was promo a website where you were supposed to be able to go and figure out where you could get tested, right? And our first clue that all of that was going to amount to nothing was the fact that they said that they had employed, I don't know, was it Google employees or Facebook employees?
Google. 7,000 Google engineers.
Yeah, right, to do that. And the Google was like, what? We don't know this thing. So, I mean, within minutes of that press conference ending, we were like, oh, this was a big show, right? And then none of it materialized, just like that website was just a fake news item from the start. So,
and you pretty quickly got the idea that the real purpose of that whole news conference was, up until that point, when the pandemic started, the stock market had been going down. It brought out all the big box CEOs, and up went the stock market. And that was the real purpose of that day, was not to get us any actual testing, but to reassure the people that matter to Donald Trump.
So I'm going to be a little fair to Donald Trump here, right? So he spent the last 6 months in a lab, wearing a lab coat, working on that vaccine, right? He's trial and error, working on those formulas, really like single-handedly creating 3 different vaccines. And so do you think the vaccine should be named after Donald Trump as a sort of a gift for his tireless efforts in making that happen?
In his secret lab that's out on the 14th fairway. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we should go one better. Why name a single vaccine after him when we can name the whole disease after him? and then he gets credit for all of it. So.
Something like Trovid or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. I think the world would be okay with letting us name the disease after Donald Trump in honor of his magnificence.
I think right now what you're seeing is a lot of secondary infections going on around the world from us. We're a petri dish now that it just infects the rest of the world.
Mark, when you think about things going forward and you see this mobilization to get this vaccine, and I mean, nothing has been more satisfying than watching healthcare workers who have been putting their lives on the line, thanklessly in many cases, for months and months, and getting these, just seeing them get the vaccination. But when you look forward, what do you see coming in the next year under different leadership, sane leadership, and sane and capable leadership, along with this mobilization of the vaccine?
Well, some of the things that Biden is going to be able to do are already prescribed by what's already happened under Trump. And Operation Warp Speed, they made a decision that was probably not a bad decision, which was don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So they bought some of this vaccine and they invested over here and they bought a little more of that vaccine. But what they failed to do was really be responsive when it showed up that the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine were being both safe and effective. They didn't follow up and then go back and get enough to cover everybody. So we're really kind of stuck waiting until Johnson & Johnson gets their vaccine out, until AstraZeneca clears their safety test, before we'll really have enough vaccine to go around. But I do think that maybe Anthony Fauci, let's hope that he's being a little bit conservative when he comes to giving his dates, right? And that maybe by early spring or late spring, most of us will have the opportunity to get that vaccine.
How worried, Mark, are you of the anti-vaxxers and their ability to sort of depress demand for the vaccine? I mean, my operating theory is once people start taking it and realizing this is sort of freedom, that there's going to be a rush for people wanting to do it. But is there a real chance that the anti-vaxxers may actually be able to slow down adoption and thus slow down herd immunity, which is so critically important?
It's certainly possible, even when you've got vaccines that are as tremendously effective. When it really helps to have a vaccine that is so surprisingly 94% effective, because we were running around with vaccines that were, say, 70% effective. We'd need to get a higher number of people to get vaccinated in order to get that herd immunity. But the fact that the vaccines are so effective is going to help us get the numbers we need. But it's right now you've got anti-vaxxers that are the sort of the traditional anti-vaxxers. And then you have to be concerned also about the Trump supporters that view all of this as hocus pocus. But I do think that there's a real chance. I think you're going to see in the next couple of weeks a flip, right? From right now, you've got maybe a third of the country that's still saying, I don't know if I want this. But I think by the time you get the Moderna vaccine out there, more people get vaccinated, what you're really going to be seeing is such a high demand for the vaccine that people are going to be calling their doctors going, when can I get it? When can I get it?
I would welcome that. I mean, if that's the problem we're going to have, then I'd rather have that problem.
Yeah, the only problem that represents is, doctors like to make their patients happy, and they want to keep their patients healthy. So it's going to be pretty easy to say, well, that guy, he's overweight, but no, he's really obese. So he's got, or that guy's, one time he had a high blood pressure reading and everything, so we're going to put him down for hypertension. It's going to be very very difficult to sort of police that line if you're really talking about trying to get it to people that need it the most first. But right now, I think we're going to have enough by the late part of the spring, at least, that almost everybody that wants it can get it. And yeah, there's still a concern, and there's still going to be communities, there's still going to be pockets of infection that because people just don't go out there and get the vaccine.
Yeah, I wonder if that's going to be a lot of the rural areas where you're seeing a lot of low compliance anyway for political and for social reasons. Can you walk us through sort of the order that people will be receiving the vaccine in? Because is that set at the federal level, or is that a state decision?
Well, the FDA has made recommendations. Like a lot of things, states aren't absolutely compelled to follow it, and they're making their own decisions kind of within some subsets. So theoretically, it's healthcare workers, frontline workers that are most exposed to the virus, and we all depend on, and absolutely they should get it first. But some states have already taken that to include, say, workers at nursing home facilities, while other states have not. And some states, the next group of people that are probably going to get it are probably nursing home residents. And then it'll be, elderly people with multiple health concerns. And then it'll be people that in general have some compounding condition. And then it'll finally get to the sort of the general public. But right now, these first two batches that are going out for both Pfizer and Moderna are probably going to be not really enough. There are 19 million people that are essential workers in terms of healthcare, first responders. So what we're getting out in these first couple of batches really won't even be enough to cover them. So it'll be another month before it really starts, hopefully, to come into the nursing homes and start to get some of the elderly patients.
So if you had, sorry, Marcos, you have something.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you had to think about your takeaway from this experience of covering this, of initially thinking, of course, people will be reasonable, then watching, just a slow rolling train wreck turn into a complete disaster. But what's your hopeful takeaway? No, I'm just kidding. What's your takeaway on all this? I mean, what do you feel like you've learned from this that you didn't know before?
Well, I mean, I think there are some upsides. I think maybe the next time something like this happens, people will respond quicker and take it more seriously sooner. Maybe there will be more full-time preparation. It's going to take a while to repair the damage to the reputation that's been done to the CDC and the FDA, because Trump has forced them to do things like approval of his pet drugs, and just this past week calling up the FDA and forcing them to rush through the vaccine when they were going to do that anyway. The FDA was set up to have a meeting on Saturday, have the approval on Sunday. The vaccine was going to roll out Monday anyway, but Trump has to jump in at the last minute, force them to do everything on Friday. So it really does look rushed again. And it's going to take a while to convince people that the FDA and the CDC are really operating in the public interest, keeping safety concerns, and not being political agencies. But there's the good thing to come out of this may be these first two vaccines, are these mRNA-based vaccines. It's a whole new technology, and it really does offer some opportunities. Moderna's vaccine was literally created within 48 hours of when the full genetic structure of the virus was released back in January.
That's crazy.
The Chinese released it that weekend. Moderna had the vaccine that we are about to get right now.
So the entire time that we've been waiting, it's been the regulatory process and the trials and all that.
They went through some basic trials, animal trials, then the series of human trials. but really it's gone about as fast as it possibly could. There was almost no development period up front in creating these vaccines.
So, Mark, Jay on Facebook asks, should Biden-Harris be vaccinated sooner, and if so, when?
So they should be. I think Trump was offered vaccines for the White House staff and either deliberately turned them down. My understanding is that they've been turned down. I don't know whether that was a political decision to make things look better or whether that was a Trump just saying, "Hey, I've already had it. Why do we need vaccines around here?" Biden and Harris should be, to me. It makes little sense not to just go ahead and give them the vaccine now. Why wouldn't you? You want to protect them.
Yeah, all of Congress as well. Mark, I think we have time for one more question. Carrie, do you have anything burning? Because I have a question I want to ask. But
go ahead, Marcos. I'd fire away.
All right. So we're so focused on when we in the United States are going to get the vaccine. What's it look like for the rest of the world, and particularly outside of wealthy nations, the industrialized world? What's it look like in the developing world? What kind of hope do they have and timeline do you think they might be looking at to get a vaccine?
I think they're really going to be looking at 2022, and the reason is just what you said. It's not just the U.S. I mean, when the U.S. didn't snatch up those Pfizer doses, other wealthy nations did. And if you look right now at the first 6 vaccines coming out, almost everything they can produce next year is already spoken for, and it's spoken for by the top tier nations in terms of wealth. It's going to be probably a year before those vaccines start to really get out to the rest of the world. And right now, some of these vaccines are fairly expensive. The Moderna one, I think, is priced around $38 a dose. So, that may not sound like a whole lot compared to some drugs, but when it comes to a vaccine program that's got to hit 7 billion people, it's a lot of money.
Oof. Yeah, it's and when you think about that, you think about the economic havoc that's going to wreak all around the world as well, and what that might do for immigration and other sort of extenuating factors that come from any kind of natural disaster that you have overseas in other nations, and this is a natural disaster.
So you've also got the other factor too, where like the Pfizer vaccine is really poorly suited to go into some of these areas because of its need for very low temperature refrigeration, the distribution issues. When you get down to the ones like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that can be stored long term at just refrigerator temperatures, and it's a 1-dose drug, so it's probably better suited to be put into self-administrable single-dose hypos. So those guys, that one is probably a vaccine that is better suited to be rolled out into a lot of areas of the planet where they don't have the medical infrastructure to support something like the Pfizer vaccine.
So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. This was incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure we'll be talking next year as we see the vaccines roll out and how that's impacting adoption and just how our lives are going to change as hopefully we start going back to normal. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you. If I have to write 141 stories on something next year, let's let it be about the Green New Deal or maybe puppies.
Puppies.
Puppies. Yes. The Puppy
141 stories.
Channel at Daily Kos.
So you can read Mark Sumner at Daily Kos. He is really probably the smartest person that I've read on issues of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm not boosting my own Daily Kos because he's really one of the smartest people, and he's made us smarter by
made us smarter. And sometimes he comes into Slack and he's like, wow, I just spent 2 hours reading 10 different research papers and I condensed it down into one blog post. And I'm just thinking, who can read 10 different research papers and condense it down into one comprehensible blog post in 2 hours? I mean, it doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel fair. It's not fair. It's not, I feel hobbled, So
it's one thing being really smart and another thing being able to communicate that intelligence in a way that other people can share in that. And Mark really pulls it off. And I can't recommend Mark's writing strongly enough at Daily Kos. Our next guest, Carrie, is David Neer. He's our political director. And there he is. David, welcome again. This is, I think, your second time on our show.
Yes, I'm super glad to be back.
So
I'm jealous of that beard, David. I've been trying to grow my beard, but what can I say? This is the best I can get right here.
every time I've tried to grow a beard, I look like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, right? I got a couple like strandy hairs like here and there. So I definitely aren't going to try that
I wish I could
again.
say this was my pandemic beard, but my laziness has been at the forefront for a long time since I work from home.
So Mark, David, move on from the pandemic. Let's talk about Georgia. So what is, I guess I'll just leave it out. Like, what's the latest information about Georgia? How are you feeling about the race, which is going to happen in just a little bit over 2 weeks?
3 weeks from today is the runoff. And it's important to note that early voting started yesterday. And obviously, voting early, voting by mail, these are all extremely popular options. So as we get closer and closer to that runoff day, things are going to be able to affect the election results just less and less, simply because more of the vote is getting baked in. What I will say, to answer your question more directly, is in a lot of ways, we are really flying blind. It's obviously really difficult for anyone to want to trust the polls. Now, there have been a few polls. They all show basically a total toss-up, maybe a couple points here for the GOP, a couple points there for Democrats. Again, they do really point to a toss-up. I will say that the polls of November 3 in Georgia were less off than they were in many other places. So maybe that gives us reason to trust them. But at the same time, as longtime election watchers may know, it's always harder to poll a special election just because the electorate who's actually going to show up to vote is simply more unpredictable. What we do know is this: both sides are as fully committed to both of these races as possible. And that is actually a really big deal for Democrats because analysts have pointed out Democrats have generally done quite poorly in Georgia runoffs, except they mostly haven't had help from the National Party. In 2008, there was a Senate runoff. Obama didn't come down to Georgia to campaign. Who knows if he even would have been helpful then? Democrats got killed. Joe Biden was just in Georgia today, and maybe we'll see Obama and Kamala Harris go down too. So the fact that Democrats are all in on this suggests exactly what I just said earlier. These races are going to go down to the wire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's any poll that doesn't show 50-50. I'm gonna discount it, right? Because it's effing tight. That's the poll. That's the Marcos poll of Georgia. It's effing tight, and there are a couple of question marks. I mean, the winner of the race is going to be the side that loses less votes from the November election, whatever the drop off is, and there's going to be a drop off. There is a question for the Republicans. Is whether they can turn out that Trump only vote, the vote that has only really turned out for Trump in 2016 and 20 did not turn out in any of the midterm or off-year elections, including governor races in Kentucky and Louisiana, which Democrats won surprisingly, despite Trump actually caring about those races and trying to get his people to vote. He's not trying now. And in fact, all the messaging from Trump world is actually a big F you to that race, which is kind of shocking. Nobody's counting on these people not to turn out because that would be foolish. But this civil war in Georgia has to have some kind of effect, you'd think, right?
Maybe. But all we can do is, like you said, hope for it, but not plan for it. The Civil War is like nothing we've ever seen. I don't know if you saw just today, but something really extraordinary happened, which is that the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who has been the subject of massive attacks from Trump on down, including the two Republican senators, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, he put out a press release today attacking Perdue and Loeffler for demanding that his office provide voter registration data that he'd already given them. And it was just dripping with contempt. He said, Perdue and Loeffler, call your offices. He had an anonymous quote from someone supposedly from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRSC, saying they already have this data. So the NRSC is attacking its own candidates in a press release being issued by another Republican.
Yes.
this is all delightful stuff, and it gives me life. But what it doesn't do is turn out votes. And
are you waking up in the morning and drinking a cup of Republican tears and just letting that fuel you on the day, David?
Oh yeah, it's all that saltiness is drying me out a little bit, but I can take it. You know, what I will say is this, you know, Marcos, you were talking about those sort of Trump only voters, and this is going to be a fascinating test of how many of them are there? Do they really exist? At the same time, the Daily Kos Elections team, thanks to Jeff Singer, our senior elections writer, just released some really interesting data within the last hour. We calculated the results of the November 3 election for president, broken down by congressional district in Georgia, and also the races for Senate. And the most interesting thing we found was that the biggest gap between Biden's win at the top of the ticket and then both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock at the Senate races came in the 6th district. The 6th district, of course, was the site of the famous special election in 2017. Biden flipped that district this year, and both Ossoff and the Democrats collectively in the special Senate race carried the district, but they were several points behind Biden. And I wonder if this means that in this, you know, these Atlanta suburbs, you had a sizable chunk of sort of never Trump Republicans, traditionally Republican voters. They were happy to vote for Biden just to get rid of the orange menace. Right. But then a little lower down the ticket, they stuck with Republicans. Are these people going to show up again? Can they be convinced to go one step further, have Trump's horrid antics and refusal to accept the election over the last 5 weeks, you know, convince them, wow, maybe we really do have to support Ossoff and Warnock this time instead of Perdue and Loeffler? I think that's going to be a huge question for January.
I have to say, what part of what is fascinating about the Civil War is it's not like there's one thing that happens, right? There's not one big event, and then it's a matter of just trying to recover from that one big event. It just keeps going. So at the same time that you had this, this statement, this like incredible statement from Raffensperger, right? Then you also have, for the first time, Mitch McConnell, no, profile in courage, finally, more than 5 weeks after every, news outlet had called the race for Joe Biden, concede basically that Biden was president-elect. And, as of when we went on air, a half hour ago, I still hadn't seen if Trump had reacted to that, had responded to that, tweeted, whatever he might do. But this is now, now the Republican Senate caucus is finally on record admitting that Joe Biden's going to be our next president. And, how is Trump going to react to that? And Republicans, I wonder about the 6th district. It seems it covers, based on what you said, this suburban Atlanta, right? Is that true? Yeah.
Jon Ossoff district, right? It's the one he.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So a piece of me has to wonder, like, are some of these, because these are people who are generally consumers of news and tuned in, right? So they're not missing everything that's happening here and just listening to what Trump says. They're got to be catching some of what's going on in the back and forth in the Republican Party. Is there at some point that these people will say, God, these are a bunch of nitwits running the party right now? We just had Republicans basically on record backing Trump's fascist coup attempt for 5 weeks. And a piece of me, I have no answer, but a piece of me wonders if at some point the people who, like you said, split their ticket between Biden and Perdue, or, Biden and Loeffler, will do something different in January, or just be disgusted by the whole process.
Yeah, there clearly are a lot of Republicans in the state of Georgia and elsewhere who have gotten disgusted with, like you said, the antics of these nitwits. At the same time, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, as Marcos was alluding before, were drawn out to vote precisely because of this horror show. And we can't ever forget the appeal of authoritarianism. So it really does cut both ways. But to circle back to your question about Trump's reaction, I believe that his press secretary was asked, and she said she didn't have an answer yet. So I assume that means we're gearing up for some more rage tweets. But you know who else hasn't responded as to whether they accept the basic reality of Joe Biden winning the presidency are Perdue and Loeffler.
Right.
So they're going to get a lot of uncomfortable questions. They're also going to be asked whether they support the absolute lunatic Kraken caucus's attempt to challenge the results in Congress. They're going to be asked that a lot. And again, we can't really know if this has a real world impact, but if you descend into the conservative fever swamps of Parler, which thankfully there is a Twitter account devoted to this called Parler Takes.
My favorite.
Yeah, right. I don't want to do it myself, but boy, they are so enraged at McConnell for recognizing Biden's win. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, you can like literally be a fly on the wall kind of by watching this. What's it called? It's on Twitter. It's called what? What's it called?
Parler Takes. Parler Takes, I believe.
Parler Takes. So if you want to go in, yeah.
You know, people talk about you need to do self-care and take care of yourself. So I have found the best self-care for me is to go into the Breitbart comment section these days and just it's so soothing to the soul and so rejuvenating, and it sort of gives me life. And the anger at McConnell, it's not new. It's not like today it happened, right? Like they've been. Everybody has failed Trump since the day he lost the election, and it just amps up. And if anybody, even Breitbart's tried to do something like, no, we need to get the vote out in Georgia. And the comment threads are just absolutely vicious. And so much so that I'm always like, is somebody paying liberals to say this stuff? Because this is so over the top ridiculous. But the question, of course, is how much of these people really, how much of it's just blowing steam off? It's the internet, not representative of real life. But whether these Trump-only voters turn out or not, it's going to make a huge difference, David, right? In the years ahead, particularly in the 2022 midterm elections, where we have a lot of good Senate pickup opportunities, but they are the 2020 battleground states all over again, right? We have to go back in Arizona and Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. We have Wisconsin, Iowa, Pennsylvania. I mean,
North Carolina,
Florida. I think we Florida, right?
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, Rubio. It is 2020 all over again. So
yes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Obviously for the longest time, midterms have always been, or almost always have been, a disaster for the party that controls the White House. But maybe we're entering a new era. If Joe Biden is seen as presiding over the end of the pandemic, the distribution of vaccines, and hopefully an economic recovery to follow, and Republicans have a hard time turning out their voters without Trump at the top of the ticket, then maybe 2022 looks totally different. The thing that I insist on most firmly is admitting that we don't know. That this election should have been humbling for absolutely everyone. And I'm still have no interest in the hot takes. I think there's still so much to learn. I think that if your conception of what happened happens to dovetail perfectly with your preconceptions, then you're probably wrong. I think we have to really keep an open mind. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely not ready to say that 2022 is going to be a disaster. It could be great. Who knows?
I mean, so much is on the line, and that Supreme Court's the thing that keeps me up at night, the 6-3 Supreme Court. And so we weren't able to get a functional Senate majority. We may get we may get a de facto Senate majority, or not de facto, real Senate majority if we have a 50-50 Senate, if we can win these runoff elections in Georgia. But it's going to be tough with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and John Hickenlooper is probably not going to be our favorite Democrat either. So
it's way better. It'd still be way better.
It's going to be way, way better, but it's not going to be structural change better.
No.
And that's really, statehood for DC and Puerto Rico, expanding the Supreme Court, real election reform. So we don't have to win by 7 million votes and then have weeks of uncertainty and chaos because once, the Republicans once again don't want to surrender, or God forbid we win by 10 million votes and they still win the election because of the Electoral College. There's so many different things that structurally we need to work on. And I don't think a 50-50 Senate gets us there, which is why 2022 is so critically important. And that starts now. I mean, it starts in Georgia because winning 3-4 seats when we have a 50-50 Senate is better than if we have a 48-52 minority. So there is so much at stake. David, as you look more, after Georgia, is there anything that is in the horizon that is of particular interest on the electoral front that's going to keep people energized and engaged?
Post Georgia. Well, Virginia, our long battle to turn Virginia blue was finally successful in 2019, but the governorship is going to be up in next year, and it's not something we can take for granted. It's not like Virginia's New York all of a sudden. It's still a single-digit state in terms of going for Biden. So progressives are going to have to remain engaged and enthused about taking Virginia to the next level. And there are some really, really interesting candidates running in the primary. One of them, of course, is Terry McAuliffe, the former governor, who had a much more progressive tenure in his time in office.
Shockingly so, but yeah.
Right. But at the same time, it's reasonable to ask, why is he running again? Why does he need to do this? Particularly when there are two really interesting Black women, Jennifer Carroll Foy and Jennifer McCullen, both state legislators, who are running. They would be the first Black women governors of Virginia. I think could be really exciting if either one wins the primary. And so, that's sort of my big 2021 focus.
So, David, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, please keep track. Daily Kos elections, not just Georgia, but any other elections, down ballot elections. Daily Kos elections is the gold standard in the political journalism world. We are a partisan site, but Daily Kos elections has a well-earned reputation as being a fair and sort of honest arbiter of race coverage.
Can I just say that I feel like David has inspired like a new thing for this show, which is maybe we should sell merch, and we could like sell conservative tier mugs, and then it would say salty but so sweet or something like that on the on the other side. I don't know. I feel like merch. You need merch? Anyway, whatever. I'm just Yes, girl. That's all. So
I mean, conservative tiers are delicious. They're going to be even more delicious if we win the runoffs in Georgia. So I'm not quite ready to determine the base level of conservative tier sweetness just yet, because that's a formula that's still in being worked on. So our final guest today is new to the show, on air, but has been behind the show from the very, very beginning. He is Walter Einenkel. He is he's a staff writer at Daily Kos. He's also the producer of the show, and so I'm really, really excited to have him actually on camera. Walter, welcome.
Hello.
Very Christmassy back there.
Good to see everybody. I know. We got the Christmas. We got the menorah in the kitchen. We're doing it all.
We do it all.
Walter is sort of kind of he's our rabble rouser on staff, right? He's the one that comes in with the internal hot takes, like the most influential music act of the 20th century was Toto. Discuss.
It's not that general, but yes, I do have.
Oh man, that is not a rift inside Daily Kos that I don't know. I feel like I may have offended some people who have never come back to me after that one. So
I don't know if Daily Kos is a big enough umbrella for the cultural takes that I have.
Oh, and don't even ask him about Madonna and her positioning on the pantheon.
Send this out to the public.
But Walter covers he covers politics, obviously, for Daily Kos. And Walter, this what strikes you the most? I know like everything happened this year. Everything happened. But if you could summarize your year in coverage, what would that look like?
Well, it started off stressful in a normal Donald Trump. I can't believe he's president, and what year is this, and how long is this going to last? And then reading Mark very early on in 2020, I was well aware of what we were looking at. And like everybody else, we've sort of been under this, this fog and this sort of general stress of COVID. But I will tell you this: the one thing that I found really positive about the entire experience is that even under all of these incredible this terrible administration of corrupt Senate, and then a pandemic, that people continue to do the work on the ground.
Yeah. And
you see stories of people doing the good stuff that people do for other people. So this is at a time when you're like, I don't even want to go outside, without wearing gloves and doing these things. And so the fact that there are 70 plus million people voting for Joe Biden, for all of the 64 million or whatever it is that voted for Trump, there are that many more people. And they're growing. There's more people becoming more and more interested. And that's the best thing that our democracy could have, is more people interested in it. So it's been this mixture of feeling really bad and also really hopeful, because it is such an extreme version of what you normally see.
It's really easy to forget if you fixate on the fact that Donald Trump got 10 to 12 million new votes out, right? And you wonder, like, how could that be possible? But the fact is that Joe Biden and Democrats got 16 million new votes out, and that didn't happen by accident. And in the end, we needed almost every single one of those, particularly in those states I talked about earlier, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Right. We needed everyone, and those votes didn't happen by accident. And for example, we talked to an organizer in Georgia who did a lot of on-the-ground work getting the Asian American community to turn out, and they increased their vote totals by 90%, I think was the number, almost double their turnout. And they were the margin of victory in Georgia. You look at the Latino community in Georgia; they were the margin of victory. When you win by that little, everybody's the margin of victory. And anybody doesn't carry their weight, we lose.
Young voters of color were the margin of victory as well. I mean, I go back to something, we started the show off with, and it sort of jives with what you're saying, Walter, which is, I like this idea of entrepreneurial, civic engagement and whatever. And I feel like that's what we've been doing, maybe without, putting some sort of label on it, since the moment Trump got elected, since the moment people poured out in the streets in protest over his election, spilling over then into the Women's March, and then into a historic number of people, getting involved in politics and either running campaigns or running for office who had never been involved in politics before, to the extraordinary numbers that we saw show up or vote, send their ballot in, whatever they did in the middle of a pandemic to make the Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's win. So the hopeful pieces, like Walter was talking about, I think we've seen that build all along the way. And, I hope that I remember going to, parties or whatever. And out here in California, people would say, well, what do you do? And I would say, well, I write about politics for a blog. And they would, there's all kinds of therapists and I don't know, yoga instructors and stuff out here. And they would be like, oh, and they wouldn't know what to say. And that was pre-Trump, right? And then once Trump happened, they would be like, oh, I just got a subscription to the Washington Post or to the New York Times or whatever. And they realized like they needed to be up to speed on what was happening. And so, I feel like I'm hoping against hope that as we head into 2021 and hopefully things start to at least settle down a little bit with COVID and with different leadership of the country, we continue to have that entrepreneurial engagement that we need to have in order to, sort of succeed in this long-term effort to claw the country back from this brink of fascism that we witnessed.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the interesting experiences of getting to watch this show, as you've both done these great interviews, is getting to see people who have an intimate passion with organizing in their respective areas and with certain ideas of how to organize, all of which are right for them and in those experiences. And it's truly inspiring because they're also the best people to articulate what it is that they're doing. And I find that that's the kind of thing that I believe will last when people start receding from wanting to deal with the news every day. You know, there's that old John Mulaney joke that like having Trump in office is like having a horse in a hospital. You just have to pay attention all the time because you don't really know what it means. Mm-hmm. And so as that disappears and people will stop paying attention maybe as intensely to the news as they did before, that the smaller stories and the organizing that can be done, that we can report on, that you guys can talk about, is really inspiring and keeps people engaged. And I think people being able to be engaged without the heavy level of stress implied by a Trump administration / pandemic is a very, I think it's a very realistic goal.
But that's in a lot of ways, that's the challenge, right? I mean, a lot of people are questioning, are liberals going to stay engaged now that we won? They didn't in 2009 after Barack Obama took over. Now, to be fair, it was a different world in so many ways. There was no liberal media other than Daily Kos and a couple, straggling sites like ours. There was no major liberal presence the way now we have with MSNBC, with Twitter. I think it's a good place to motivate and energize activists. But also, we had supermajorities in the House and Senate. So I think people felt like we did our job. We're out of here. Of course, Ted Kennedy passed away. We lost that special election in Massachusetts. Talk about a different world. And so 2010, we got blown out, right? So people are still like, wait, is it going to be that way? I think a 50-50 Senate or even a Mitch McConnell Senate makes it very tough to think that anything got finished. Right. And we don't know what to expect out of a Joe Biden administration. We have hopes. But that, to me, that's really the question. If people stay engaged the way I think we're seeing in Georgia, I think we have a fighting chance.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we are in deep trouble, particularly because of the Supreme Court, the 6-3 court. Like we cannot afford to give up ground anywhere.
I do think that this is, I appreciate look back on 2009, right? When Obama comes into office, we have these super majorities, or what seems like a super majority. I mean, it took us a while actually to get the Senate to 60, right? Because there was the contested election in Minnesota. But anyway, so 60 votes in the Senate to filibuster proof. Anyway, I get too lost in details. But what was interesting, what I do think that this is a different moment in time and has the possibility of creating sort of a different effect. And I know, one of the things that I hear all the time with people voting is, I'm voting because my life depends on it, because and that is true. It became more evident than ever during the pandemic that a functional democracy, a functional government actually matters in terms of whether or not we can save lives, we can fight off a pandemic, we can, handle our allies and our adversaries globally, and any number of things. I'm hoping that something that is as big as that will keep people engaged. And I do know one of the communities that did stay engaged after Obama got elected was the LGBTQ community. I was reporting on it. I was reporting on those activists. And one thing that happened that made the difference for that community during that election was that Proposition 8 passed in California, and that stripped same-sex marriage rights from everyone in the state. And people were like, on the same night that Obama, we had this historic elevation of the first person of color to, the Oval Office. We also had a whole group of people that realized their rights, even in a state, their dignity, their basic dignity, even in a progressive state like California, could be stripped away at any moment by a bare majority. And I think that really continued the activism throughout the first 2 years. And there were a lot, and while a lot of other progressive things didn't get done during the first 2 years of the Obama administration, there were some real wins there, including the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell legislation, the anti-gay military ban, in the so that was set us up, the community up for wins in his administration, culminating in the 2015 same-sex marriage ruling at the Supreme Court. So something as catastrophic as a pandemic, I think, can focus people and can keep them engaged. And I'm hopeful that will happen.
Yeah, Walter, what's your sense?
I mean, I think that I totally agree with Carrie. I also think that, as every week has shown, the organizational infrastructure built in Georgia, built in Arizona, these things have to go back years. And the more years that they are continued to be fed and supported, the stronger those ties come, the more, what was the thing that people, if they get to vote twice, they're a voter for life. Mm-hmm. And even if that's 3 times, whatever it is, the more you have that engagement, the more it becomes a part of people's lives, and then they have these networks, is the stronger engagement that will exist. And it has to happen, right? It's people are finding places to have their autonomy, and one of those places, because of a pandemic that's really wasted away and exposed a lot of our infrastructural weaknesses, because of our kind of greedy power structure right now, is organizing and doing and helping people within their community. And I think that we're seeing those dividends pay out. So no matter what happens in the runoff in Georgia, we're having a runoff in Georgia. Like, that wasn't 4 years ago. That wasn't something that I
Georgia.
was imagining. Georgia? I was not looking anywhere near that part of the map. So while I think the thing is that no matter what happens, trying to make sure that people realize that this is that it's still positive, no matter if it's positive or if it's sort of not as positive. That these are steps forward.
Right. We have time for one more question. And so, as you look ahead to your job next year, and you're going to be writing about politics, like what would be an ideal world for you? What would America look like by the end of 1 year from today?
1 year from today?
Yeah. So it's
I'll
Christmas
be
time.
Sick and playing outside with everybody in a sprinkler with no mask on.
No mask on. Crazy.
I hope that I'm writing about, the benefits of a new food assistance program, the benefits of maybe a teachers union strike to get better. I want to see that activism. Realistically speaking, it's not going to be all roses. And so I'm hopeful that I'm going to be writing more of those stories, and maybe even stories about settlements being made and deals being made between the new attorney general and police departments in terms of how they're going to use their oversight in new training programs and community programs, so that we don't have to have Black Lives Matter marches all the time, because there is a movement towards racial justice. So hopefully those types of stories are the ones that I'm writing.
Man, I feel terrible, because had I answered that question, I would have said Donald Trump in prison, but you totally showed me up by actually saying something positive and wonderful.
I have nothing nice to say about Donald Trump. I grew up in New York City, so I've been waiting for Donald Trump to be in prison since like 1980. And so I'm not holding my breath any longer on that one.
If that happens, it's going to be like, 30, 40 years too late for you.
It might be really sweet. Maybe I'll just have it as like a second birthday party or something. It'll be like my new anniversary.
All right. That's all the time we have today. Walter, thank you so much. Thanks again to David Neer and Mark Sumner for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Thanks. This is our 12th episode, final one of the year. We'll see you on the other side of the New Year's in 2021. Please subscribe, wear a mask, subscribe to Daily Coast, and catch us on the other side. We're going to have a podcast version of this coming up too, which I'm excited about. So lots of great things happen, but be safe. Be merry, be jolly, celebrate. Maybe go to dailycoast.com/GOTV for Get Out the Vote and sign up for some Get Out the Vote in Georgia. We have a lot of organizations doing Get Out the Vote in Georgia. So maybe do a little bit of that. But really, you've earned it. This has been a grueling year. We've survived. Next year, hopefully, we can start building again. Thank you so very much. Love you all. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, all of the above. You guys are awesome. Catch you later.